The transport van's brakes squealed against the desert heat as it rolled to a stop outside the Advanced Combat Training Facility. Staff Sergeant Mara Daniels stepped down onto cracked asphalt, her left leg taking the impact with a slight hitch she had learned to disguise as careful movement. Mid-30s, unremarkable in every way the Army had taught her to be. Plain fatigues, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it looked severe. The only thing that stood out were her eyes, dark brown, constantly moving, cataloging exits and angles without seeming to try. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the concrete and steel of the training compound. Heat waves shimmered off distant mountains, creating an otherworldly backdrop for what was supposed to be the pinnacle of military education. This was where the best came to become better, where elite soldiers refined skills that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Staff Sergeant Daniels, reporting for Class Bravo 12. She announced to the admin sergeant behind bulletproof glass. The admin sergeant barely looked up from his paperwork, sliding a key card across the counter with practiced indifference. Second floor, room 214. Don't be late for briefings. These instructors don't care what you did before you got here. The barracks smelled like industrial disinfectant and 30 years of boots. Mara claimed a bunk in the far corner. Last row, clear view of the entrance, back to the wall. Old habits from places where sleeping in the wrong spot could get you killed. She arranged her gear with military precision, every item in its designated place, ready for immediate deployment. If needed at evening chow, she sat alone near the windows, tray organized with the same methodical care she applied to everything else. 3 tables over, a group of younger soldiers were discussing scores loud enough for half the room to hear. Lieutenant Jake Markham had the kind of easy confidence that came from never being truly tested. Perfect uniform, perfect posture, perfect teeth. The 3 nodding along were cut from similar cloth. David Peters, skinny and nervous. Carlos Torres, built like a gym poster. Alex Miller, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. Some people get here because they can still do the job, Markham was saying, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. Others get here because someone feels sorry. For them, when Mara walked past their table, the conversation died. Torres muttered something that made the others chuckle. She didn't react, but she filed their faces away for a later reference, the way you memorize terrain before moving through it. These were the type of soldiers she had encountered before, young, cocky, convinced that their limited experience represented the entirety of military capability. Master Chief Robert Harrison watched the interaction from across the room. 28 years in the Navy, the last 15 spent training special operations candidates. He had seen thousands of soldiers pass through these halls, and he had learned to read the subtle signs that separated the genuine articles from the pretenders. Most instructors looked at test scores and physical performance metrics. Harrison looked deeper. There was something about Staff Sergeant Daniels that didn't quite fit the narrative her performance suggested. During the initial briefing, she had positioned herself near an exit, always where she could see the whole room. Her gear was arranged with a precision that spoke of years spent where disorganization could get you killed. When she thought no one was looking, her hands ran through weapons manipulations with a fluidity that contradicted every fumbled reload on the range. The first warning sign came during weapons orientation. Each soldier was required to field strip and reassemble their assigned rifle while blindfolded, a basic test of familiarity with standard equipment. Most candidates completed the task in under 2 minutes. The exceptional ones did it in 90 seconds. Mara took 4 minutes and 23 seconds. Her fingers fumbled with components she should have known intimately. The magazine release stuck. The bolt carrier group went in backward on the first attempt. By the time she finished, Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the air-conditioned classroom. "Daniels," Instructor Williams called out, not hiding his disappointment. "You're going to need to do better than that." Behind her, Markham's voice carried just loud enough to be heard. "Guess some people's qualification records don't transfer." Miller added with a smirk, "Wonder what else doesn't transfer." But Harrison noticed something the others missed. When Mara thought no one was watching, she had disassembled and reassembled the same rifle in under 40 seconds. Muscle memory taking over before conscious thought could interfere. The fumbling wasn't from lack of knowledge. It was from something else entirely. That night, as the barracks settled into the quiet rhythms of military sleep, Harrison reviewed her file one more time. Combat tours in classified locations. Recommendations. From officers whose names were redacted. Citations for actions that were described in the vaguest possible terms. Everything about Staff Sergeant Mara Daniels suggested someone with capabilities far beyond what she was displaying. The question was why someone that skilled would be performing like a complete amateur. And more importantly, what would happen when whatever was holding her back finally let go? The rifle qualification range stretched out under the Nevada sky, target silhouettes wavering in the heat haze at 200 meters. What should have been easy shooting for anyone with advanced training became Mara's first public failure. Her initial shot went wide, missing the target entirely. The reload that should have been automatic turned into a fumbled disaster, fingers angling the magazine wrong, precious seconds bleeding away while everyone else was already back to shooting. When the buzzer sounded, her target looked like someone learning to shoot instead of someone who had been doing it professionally for over a decade. "Daniels," Instructor Rodriguez called out, making notes on his clipboard. "You're scoring in the bottom 10%. This is basic marksmanship." Behind her, the whispers started in earnest. Torres cracked his knuckles, a gesture that seemed casual but drew attention to exactly how much bigger he was than most people in the room. "I don't know what she did before this, but it sure wasn't combat." Peters laughed, high and nervous. "Maybe she was a cook or something, rear echelon stuff." Markham was more direct. "That was painful to watch. Seriously painful. Someone's going to get hurt if she keeps performing like that." Miller's contribution was delivered with surgical precision. Maybe she should try a different line of work. Something safer, like accounting. They weren't being subtle about it. Half the people in the staging area could hear them, including the instructors. But they kept their voices just on the right side of what could be called constructive criticism rather than harassment. The kind of behavior that was technically within regulations, but designed to break down someone's confidence systematically. Mara finished cleaning her weapon in silence, checked her gear methodically, and walked out without acknowledging any of it. But the damage was accumulating. Each failure built on the last, creating a narrative that became harder to escape with every passing day. The urban combat course was built from shipping containers and plywood, a maze of rooms and corridors, designed to simulate the kind of close-quarters fighting that had defined 2 decades of war. It smelled like sawdust and simulated gunpowder, echoing with the sharp reports of training ammunition and the shouts of instructors calling out hits and misses. Moving through it should have been like breathing for someone with Mara's experience. But when her turn came to run the kill house, everything that should have been automatic felt forced and artificial. She stacked up outside the first door, weapon ready, breathing controlled. The instructor gave her the go signal, and she moved, but not fast enough. The paper target inside had time to kill the cardboard hostage before she could engage. The buzzer sounded failure, and the red light bathed everything in accusatory crimson. "Daniels," the instructor called out. "Remember that hesitation kills people." She tried to push through the next door faster, but her angles were wrong. Muzzle too high on the first sweep, too low on the second. By the time she had cleared the room, 2 more cardboard teammates were marked as casualties. The sound of training, rounds snapping past her head, made her shoulders tense in ways that had nothing to do with the current scenario. For just a moment, she wasn't in a plywood room in the Nevada desert. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere darker and more dangerous, where the bullets weren't simulated and the people shooting them weren't instructors trying to teach lessons about tactical movement. Daniels. The voice cut through whatever. Memory had grabbed her. "You still with us?" She blinked, oriented herself, finished the run. But the damage was done. Her final score was near the bottom of the board, and everyone could see it. Back in the staging area, Markham made sure his voice carried when he talked to his crew. That was seriously concerning. Someone's going to get hurt if she keeps freezing up like that. The nicknames started that afternoon. Tourist followed her everywhere, whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Dead weight got tossed around whenever she slowed down a team exercise. The 4 antagonists had made it there. Personal mission to remind her and everyone else that she didn't belong. But Master, Chief Harrison was watching something different. He had positioned himself where he could observe not just Mara's performance, but her behavior between exercises. During breaks, she moved through the base like someone who had memorized every corner. Her situational awareness was constant and comprehensive, the reflexes of someone who had learned to survive in very dangerous places. When she thought no one was looking, her weapons handling was flawless. Magazine changes performed with mechanical precision. Malfunction clearances executed without conscious thought. These weren't the habits of someone new to combat. They were the reflexes of someone who had made warfare an art form. The question wasn't whether Mara Daniels knew how to fight. The question was why she wasn't fighting now. The obstacle course should have been straightforward. Over the wall, across the rope bridge, under the wire, through the tire run. Physical challenges that had nothing to do with weapons or tactics, just raw fitness and determination. The kind of thing Mara should have been able to do in her sleep. She started well enough. Cleared the first wall clean, crossed the rope bridge. With sure footing, low-crawled under the wire without snagging her gear. Her time was competitive, maybe even good. Other candidates were breathing hard, struggling with the desert heat and the relentless pace. And then came the flashbang simulator. The device was designed to replicate the disorienting effects of a stun grenade. A sharp crack like thunder, bright white light that burned through closed eyelids. Standard equipment for preparing soldiers for the sensory chaos of real combat. Most candidates flinched, recovered, and continued. Some stumbled briefly before regaining their composure. When it went off, Mara froze completely. Not a tactical pause, not a moment of assessment. Complete, paralyzed stillness, like someone had cut her strings. Her breathing quickened, eyes wide and distant, staring at something no one else could see. The seconds stretched. 5, 10, 15. Other trainees were finishing the course, calling out their times, slapping each other on the back, but Mara stood motionless in the middle of the obstacle, trapped in whatever memory the sound had triggered. "Daniels!" The instructor's voice cut through the desert air. "Move!" She blinked, oriented herself, pushed forward. But the damage was done. Her final time was near the bottom of the board, and everyone had seen the freeze. Worse, they had seen what caused it. That night in the barracks, the whispers were different. Less mocking, more uncomfortable. PTSD was something everyone understood in theory, but seeing it in action made people nervous. Made them wonder if someone who could freeze up like that had any business carrying a weapon. Markham and his crew were less subtle in their assessment. Did you see that? Torres was saying to anyone who would listen. She just stopped. Right. In the middle of everything. Shell shock, Miller said with the casual authority of someone who had read about trauma in a textbook. Seen it before. Usually means they're done. Peters nodded sagely. Can't trust someone like that in a real fight. Never know when they're going to crack. Markham summed it up with typical bluntness. She's broken. Somebody should tell her before she gets herself or someone else killed. From her bunk in the corner, Mara heard every word. Her expression never changed, but her hands clenched once, briefly, before she turned toward the wall and closed her eyes. The next morning, Master Chief Harrison found her on the range before dawn, running through weapon drills in the half-light. Solo practice, no instructor supervision, just muscle memory working against whatever was holding her back during official training. He watched from a distance as she ran through magazine changes, malfunction clearances, target transitions. Every movement was crisp, professional, exactly what you would expect from someone with years of experience. Whatever was wrong with there wasn't lack of skill. The official evaluation came that afternoon. Mara was called into the administrative office, where 3 instructors sat behind a metal desk with her files spread out before them. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving illumination. Staff Sergeant Daniels, the senior instructor, began. We've been reviewing your performance over the past 10 days. Your scores in marksmanship, close quarters combat, and stress response are consistently below acceptable standards. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mara sat at attention, hands folded in her lap, expression neutral. She had heard similar words before, in different contexts, but the weight was the same. We understand that transitioning from previous assignments can be challenging, another instructor added. Combat stress affects everyone differently. There's no shame in recognizing when it's time to step back. What they were really saying was that she was broken. That whatever she had been before, she wasn't that person anymore. The kindest thing would be to let her go with dignity before she hurt herself or someone else. You have 48 hours to pass a comprehensive final evaluation, the senior instructor continued. If you cannot demonstrate acceptable proficiency across all measured competencies, you will be removed from the program with a recommendation for medical evaluation. Everyone knew it was a formality. The test was designed for people who had been succeeding, not for someone who had been failing consistently for nearly 2 weeks. She would take the exam, fail it, and be gone by the weekend. That evening, Mara sat alone in the mess hall, picking at food she couldn't taste. Around her, conversations flowed about upcoming assignments, speculation about who would make it through the program, plans for leave time. Normal military chatter from people whose futures weren't hanging by a thread. Markham's table was louder than usual, their voices carrying across the room with the confidence of people who knew they belonged. It's really for the best, Miller was saying. Some people just aren't cut out for this level of training. Torres nodded agreement. Better to find out here than in the field where it actually matters. Still feel kind of bad for her, Peters added, though his tone suggested the sympathy was more theoretical than genuine. Markham's response was characteristically direct. Don't. The military isn't a charity. If you can't hack it, you don't belong here. What none of them knew was that their assessment was about to be proven spectacularly wrong. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected interruption to the routine of failure and disappointment that had become Mara's reality. The black SUV appeared without warning, rolling through the main gate with the kind of authority that made guards step aside without asking questions. Tinted windows, government plates, the type of vehicle that meant someone important was paying. Attention dotted, parked near the administration building, and for a moment, the entire training yard went quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the instructors paused what they were doing to watch. The kind of attention that suggested this wasn't a routine visit. The rear door opened first, then the driver's side. Two figures emerged, but only one of them mattered. Commander Kyle Brooks looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if they needed someone to play a Navy SEAL. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in hard places doing difficult things. His uniform was crisp, but not showy. Decorations limited to the essentials, but it was the way he moved that got everyone's attention. No wasted motion, every step deliberate, eyes constantly scanning without seeming to. The walk of someone who had learned to assess threats before they became problems. He headed straight for Master Chief Harrison, who was standing near the equipment shed, trying to figure out what kind of visit this was going to be. "Chief Harrison," Brooks said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm Commander Brooks. I understand you have Staff Sergeant Mara Daniels in your program." Harrison straightened slightly. "Yes, sir." "May I ask what this is regarding?" "I'd like to observe her next evaluation, sir. She's scheduled for dismissal. Her performance has been—" Brooks held up a hand. "I'm not here to challenge your assessment, Chief. I just want to see her run one more course." Across the yard, Mara had gone completely still. She was standing by the weapons rack, ostensibly checking her rifle, but her attention was entirely focused on the conversation happening 50 meters away. Other trainees were staring openly now, trying to figure out what was happening. Markham and his crew had clustered together, whispering among themselves. "Who's the Navy guy?" Peters wanted to know. "And why is he asking about the tourist?" Torres added that Miller was studying Mara's reaction, noting the sudden tension in her posture. "Look at her. She knows him." Harrison was explaining the situation to Brooks, keeping his voice low but not quite low enough. "She's been struggling with high-stress scenarios. Hesitation, freezing up, inconsistent performance. The board's already made its decision." Brooks nodded thoughtfully. "What if I told you she wasn't struggling? What if I told you she was holding back?" "Sir?" "Give her one more run, Chief. Let me stand on the line, and when I give her the word, you'll see what she's really capable of." Harrison considered this. Protocol said he should refuse. Outside observers weren't allowed during evaluations, and the decision about Mara had already been made. But something in Brooks' tone suggested this wasn't really a request. "What kind of word are we talking about, sir?" Brooks' mouth ticked in what might have been a smile. "Just 3 words, Chief. That's all it'll take." The afternoon sun was brutal, turning the training complex into an oven that baked everything under open sky. Heat shimmers rose from asphalt and concrete, distorting the air until distant objects seemed to dance. Mara's squad assembled for what everyone assumed would be her final evaluation. The scenario was straightforward: urban hostage rescue. Multiple buildings, unknown number of hostile actors, 30-minute time limit. It was the same type of exercise they had been running all week. The same type Mara had been failing consistently. Commander Brooks positioned himself just inside the perimeter fence, hands clasped behind his back, watching with the intensity of someone who had seen similar operations conducted for real. He didn't have a clipboard or headset, just eyes that missed nothing. The other instructors gave him space, uncertain about his presence, but unwilling to challenge someone with his obvious authority. Master Chief Harrison stood nearby, equally curious about what was about to happen. When the squad moved out, Mara fell into her usual pattern almost immediately. Careful entries, excessive caution at corners, hesitation at every decision point. The kind of behavior that had marked her as unreliable for 2 straight weeks. Markham's voice crackled over the comm system. "Here we go again. Try to keep up this time, tourist." They breached the first building and immediately ran into problems. Mara's slow entry allowed a hostile actor to kill Peters before he could react. The buzzer sounded, red lights flashed, and another mark went. against her performance record. "Damn it, Daniels," Torres shouted. "Move like you mean it." Miller's voice was sharp with frustration. "Some of us want to pass this thing." From the observation area, it looked like the same story playing out again. Mara Daniels, the broken soldier who couldn't handle pressure, dragging down everyone around her. But Brooks was watching something else entirely. He was tracking her positioning, noting how she moved through the space, cataloging the micro-decisions she made at every turn. To his trained eye, her hesitations weren't random. They followed a pattern that spoke of deeper programming, the kind of conditioning that took years to develop and couldn't be easily erased. The transformation that was about to occur would change everything they thought they knew about staff. Sergeant Mara Daniels. They entered the second building, a narrow structure designed to simulate apartment-style fighting, close quarters, limited visibility, multiple entry points. The kind of environment where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Mara moved to the rear of the formation, checking corners that had already been cleared, tracking angles that weren't immediately relevant. To her squad mates, it looked like paranoia or incompetence. To Brooks, it looked like someone whose training ran deeper than anyone realized. They were halfway through the building when he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the cum chatter and weapons fire like a blade through silk. "Daniels. Ghost. Protocol. Execute." The transformation was immediate and absolute. 1 second, Mara was the hesitant soldier who had been failing exercises for 2 weeks. The next, she was something else entirely, something dangerous and precise and utterly in control. Her rifle snapped up to her shoulder as she flowed past Markham, already acquiring targets that hadn't even appeared yet. When the first hostile popped up in a doorway, she was ready. Control pair, center mass, before the target could even finish its mechanical movement. "What the hell?" Torres started to say, but she was already moving to the next room. Her movement through the building was like watching water flow downhill. Natural, inevitable, finding the path of least resistance, while carrying unstoppable force. She didn't clear corners so much as anticipate them, weapon tracking to the right angle before the threat even materialized. The technical precision was stunning. Rifle transfers from strong side to weak side to navigate tight corners. Tactical reloads performed without breaking stride. Target transitions so smooth they looked choreographed. But it was more than just technical skill. This was someone who understood violence at a fundamental level, who could read the geometry of a firefight and position herself exactly where she needed to be before anyone else even knew the fight was happening. Markham and his crew found themselves scrambling to keep up, following in her wake as she systematically dismantled every challenge the course could present. What had been a 30-minute time limit became a 10-minute execution. Clean, professional, and utterly decisive. Peters, who had been marked as killed in the first building, watched through the observation window with his mouth hanging open. How is she doing that? Torres was breathing hard, trying to process what he was witnessing. She's like a completely different person. Miller, ever analytical, was tracking her movements with growing unease. This isn't random. This is training. The kind of training most people never see. When they reached the hostage room, the final test that had stumped dozens of squads, Mara didn't even pause at the threshold. She read the geometry in an instant, identified the hostile positions, calculated the angles, and moved. 2 targets. Down before anyone could react. Hostage secured, room cleared, extraction route already planned. The buzzer sounded, but this time it was the success tone. The sound that meant mission accomplished. In the staging area, instructors stared at their stopwatches in disbelief. Not just because of the time, though it was a course record, but because of the transformation they had just witnessed. Markham pulled off his helmet, still breathing hard, eyes wide with confusion and something that might have been fear. What the hell was that? How did you? Mara was already safing her weapon, expression calm and professional. The dangerous creature who had just dominated the course was gone, replaced by the quiet woman who had been failing exercises for 2 weeks. What? Was what? She asked mildly, but everyone had seen it. The sudden competence, the impossible skill, the way she had moved through that building like she had designed it herself. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It was training, the kind of training that most people never knew existed. Commander Brooks approached the staging area with the same measured pace he had maintained throughout the exercise. No hurry, no celebration, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen exactly what he had expected to see. "Chief," he said to Harrison, "I think we need to have a conversation about Staff Sergeant Daniel's record." The whispers started. Immediately, students clustered in small groups, voices low but urgent, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. The woman they had dismissed as broken had just demonstrated capabilities that defied everything they thought they knew about military training. But the real revelations were still to come. The debriefing room was small and windowless, the kind of space designed for conversations that needed to stay private. Mara sat at the table, rifle disassembled for cleaning, while Brooks and Harrison tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Ghost protocol," Harrison said slowly. "That's not in any manual I've read." Brooks leaned back in his chair, measuring his words carefully. "Because it's not supposed to be. Classified program, need-to-know basis. Small teams, deep penetration, high-value targets in denied areas." Harrison looked at Mara, who was cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. "And Daniels was part of this?" "She was the best part of it," Brooks replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. 3 years operating in places that don't officially exist, doing things that never officially happened. Perfect mission record, 0 friendly casualties, extraction rate of 100%. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Harrison had trained thousands of soldiers over the years, but he had never encountered anything like what he had just witnessed. The sudden transformation from apparent incompetence to lethal efficiency suggested conditioning that went far beyond standard military training. So what happened? Harrison asked. Why the transfer to regular training? Mara's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. Took a hit on the last mission. Eyed, close quarters, hostile territory. Medical rotation stateside while they decided if I was still fit for duty. Brooks nodded. The Ghost Protocol program requires very specific psychological conditioning. Operatives learn to compartmentalize, to suppress certain responses until they receive proper authorization codes. It's a safety measure, keeps them from going operational during routine activities. Authorization codes, Harrison repeated. Like what you said on the course. Exactly. Without the proper trigger phrase, Ghost Protocol operatives appear to be normal soldiers with normal limitations. With it, he gestured toward the window, where Mara's course record was still being analyzed by incredulous instructors. They become what they were trained to be. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. So for 2 weeks, she was essentially, what? Acting? Not acting, Mara said quietly. Contained. The conditioning isn't something you turn on and off like a switch. It's more like keeping a leash on a guard dog. It's still a guard dog, but it won't bite until someone gives it permission. The explanation raised as many questions as it answered. How many other soldiers were walking around with similar conditioning? What kind of missions required that level of psychological programming? And most importantly, what did this mean for Mara's future? The brass wanted to see if she could function in conventional units after her injury. Brooks continued. They thought maybe the conditioning had been compromised, that she had lost the ability to operate at that level. And had she? Harrison asked. Brooks' smile was grim. You saw what happened out there, Chief. Does that look compromised to you? Outside, word of the exercise was spreading through the base like wildfire. Students who had witnessed the transformation were trying to explain it to those who hadn't, but the words seemed inadequate. How do you describe watching someone transcend every limitation you thought defined them? Markham sat in the mess hall, staring at his untouched dinner, replaying the exercise in his mind. Every assumption he had made about Mara, every cruel comment, every moment of casual harassment, all of it felt different now. He had spent 2 weeks mocking someone who could have killed him without breaking stride. Torres was equally shaken. Did you see how she moved through that building? Like she owned it. Peters nodded, still pale. And the shooting. Those weren't lucky shots. That was precision. Miller, ever the analyst, was trying to fit the pieces together. The way she hesitated before, it wasn't fear, it was restraint. She was holding back the whole time. The realization was sobering. They had been watching a master craftsman pretend to be an amateur, and they had never suspected the truth. The question now was what happened next, both for Mara and for the program that had nearly dismissed the most capable soldier any of them had ever seen. The course record stayed on the board for the rest of the program, a stark reminder that sometimes appearances could be deceiving. Mara's name sat at the top in clean block letters, her time untouched despite 2 more weeks of attempts by increasingly motivated trainees. The discharge recommendation vanished from her file within hours of the exercise. In its place appeared a new assignment, Advanced Tactical Instructor, Special Operations Training Command. Not a demotion or a lateral move, but a recognition of capabilities that few people even knew existed. Markham and his crew became notably quieter after the revelation. No more nicknames, no more casual harassment. They had seen something that didn't fit into their understanding of how the world worked, and it had shaken them more than they wanted to admit. Peters tried to apologize one evening, catching Mara outside the mess hall. Look, we didn't know about what you could do. I mean, the things we said, ... Double quotes, Mara considered this for a moment. Most people don't know. That's kind of the point. But why didn't you just, show them earlier? Save yourself all the grief? Her answer was simple and devastating. Because I wasn't authorized to. The weight of that statement hung between them. Peters realized he had been party to harassment of someone whose capabilities exceeded anything he could imagine. The guilt was immediate and crushing. Torres and Miller kept their distance after that, speaking to her only when required for training purposes. But Harrison noticed they had started studying her technique during exercises, trying to understand how someone could move through a space with such absolute confidence. Markham was the most affected. The easy arrogance that had defined him for 2 weeks was gone, replaced by a quiet uncertainty that made him second-guess every decision. He had built his identity around being the best, the natural leader, the obvious choice for advanced assignments. And then he had watched someone he dismissed as broken casually demolish every assumption he had made about himself and the world around him. Commander Brooks departed the morning after the revelation, shaking hands with Harrison and offering Mara a brief nod of acknowledgement. No long goodbyes, no dramatic speeches, just the quiet professionalism of people who understood that some stories were meant to stay classified. But before he left, he pulled Harrison aside for a final conversation. Should probably request assignment to a training command, he said. Teaching, instruction, that kind of thing. Don't try to talk her out of it. Why not? If she's as good, as you say, because people like her have already given enough. They've spent years in places most of us can't imagine. doing things most of us couldn't handle. At some point, they've earned the right to pass on what they know instead of using it. Harrison watched the SUV disappear into the desert heat, carrying with it the only person who really understood what Mara had been through. The rest of the program continued without incident. Mara completed her remaining evaluations with quiet competence, not the explosive skill she had displayed during the Ghost Protocol exercise, but solid professional performance that reminded everyone she was exactly where she belonged. The other students began to see her differently, not as the broken soldier they had initially dismissed, but as someone whose experience transcended their understanding. Some approached her for advice on technique. Others simply watched and learned, recognizing that they were in the presence of expertise they might never encounter again. The instructors, too, adjusted their perspective. Harrison found himself consulting with Mara on course design, incorporating lessons from her experience into the curriculum. Her insights into combat psychology and tactical decision-making proved invaluable for preparing the next generation of soldiers. But perhaps the most significant change was in Mara herself. For the first time in months, she seemed at peace with her role, no longer struggling against conditioning that prevented her from performing at her full capability. She could focus on what came next, sharing her knowledge with those who would carry the mission forward. On graduation day, Mara stood in formation with the rest of her class, no different from any other soldier receiving orders and moving on to the next assignment. But those who had been there, who had seen what happened when someone gave her permission to be dangerous, carried that knowledge with them. The ceremony was standard military pageantry. Speeches about duty and honor, presentations of certificates, formal recognition of achievement. But underneath the routine, there was an undercurrent of understanding among those who knew the real story. They had witnessed something extraordinary, disguised as ordinary failure. Markham approached her after the ceremony, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching humility. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "for everything we said, everything we did. We had no idea." Mara studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You saw what you were supposed to see. That was the point of the conditioning. Still," he insisted, "the way we treated you was wrong, regardless of what we thought we knew." "Lesson learned," she replied. "Next time, maybe reserve judgment until you have all the facts." It was a gentle rebuke, but the message was clear. Assumptions based on limited information could lead to serious misjudgments about people's capabilities and worth. Master Chief Harrison found her later, reviewing her new assignment orders. "Special Operations. Training Command," he noted. "Good fit." "I think so," she agreed. "Time to teach instead of hide." Harrison nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. "Any advice for the next group coming through?" Mara considered the question, thinking about the lessons learned over the past month. Don't assume you know someone's story based on their current performance. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who've learned to hold back. The base began to empty as graduates departed for their new assignments. Some headed to combat units, others to specialized training programs. A few, like Mara, transitioned to teaching roles where their experience could benefit the next generation. Peters and Torres made their own awkward attempts at reconciliation before leaving. The apologies were clumsy but genuine, born from the recognition that they had participated in something they now understood was fundamentally wrong. "We learned something important here," Torres admitted, "about jumping to conclusions. About respect," Peters added, "and about recognizing that we don't know everything." Miller was more analytical in his approach, seeking to understand the broader implications. "How many others are out there like you? People with capabilities we can't see. More than you might think," Mara replied. "The military has always had quiet professionals who do their jobs without fanfare. The key is learning to recognize value, even when it doesn't announce itself." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the training complex in shades of gold and crimson, Mara packed her gear for the final time. Everything had its place, arranged with the same precision that had marked her as different from the beginning. The past month had been a journey of revelation, not just for those who had underestimated her, but for herself as well. She had learned that healing didn't always mean returning to exactly what you were before. Sometimes it meant finding new ways to use old skills, new purposes for hard-earned experience. Commander Brooks had been right about the teaching assignment. After years of operating in shadows, there was something deeply satisfying about working in the light, sharing knowledge that could keep other soldiers alive and mission-capable. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Heard about your graduation. Proud of you. Looking forward to working together again someday. KB, she smiled, recognizing Brooks' understated style. The Ghost Protocol program might be classified, but the bonds formed between those who had served in it remained strong. The new assignment would bring different challenges. Training the next generation of special operations soldiers required patience, wisdom, and the ability to recognize potential, even when it wasn't immediately obvious. It meant being the kind of instructor she wished she had encountered during her own early training as she walked toward the transport that would take her to her new duty station. Mara reflected on the lessons of the past month. Appearances truly could be deceiving. Strength sometimes looked like weakness. And the most dangerous people were often the ones you would never suspect. The other graduates would carry their own lessons forward. Markham had learned humility and the danger of assumptions. Peters and Torres had discovered the importance of treating others with respect regardless of their apparent capabilities. Miller had gained insight into the complexity of human nature and military service. But perhaps the most important lesson was universal. Every person carries stories you cannot see, experiences that have shaped them in ways you cannot understand, and capabilities that may only emerge under specific circumstances. The transport pulled away from the training complex as darkness settled over the desert. Behind them, the facility prepared for the next class of students, the next cycle of training and evaluation. The instructors would carry forward the memory of what they had witnessed, incorporating new understanding into their methods. Master Chief Harrison stood on the observation deck, watching the lights disappear into the distance. In his 30 years of military service, he had seen many extraordinary things, but the transformation of Mara Daniels would remain one of the most remarkable. The official reports would document her record-setting performance and exemplary graduation. But the real story, the one about second chances, hidden strengths, and the danger of underestimating quiet professionals, would live on in the memories of those who had been there to witness it. Some secrets were too important to forget, even when they were too classified to share openly. The story of Staff Sergeant Mara Daniels would become legend among those who knew the truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one that doesn't look dangerous until someone gives it permission to be. Years later, when new students struggled with their own challenges, instructors would remember the lesson of the soldier who appeared to be failing until the moment she was authorized to succeed. They would look more carefully at those who seemed to be struggling, wondering what stories lay beneath the surface. What capabilities might be waiting for the right moment to emerge? The Nevada desert kept its secrets, but the lessons learned in its harsh embrace would echo through future generations of warriors. In a world where strength was often measured by what people could see, Mara Daniels had reminded everyone that the most formidable forces were often the ones that remained hidden until they were needed most. The black SUV that had started everything was long gone, disappeared back into whatever shadowy world had produced it. But its impact remained, a reminder that in the military, as in life, things were rarely as simple as they first appeared. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Staff Sergeant Mara Daniels traveled toward her new assignment, carrying with her the hard-earned wisdom that would shape the next chapter of her service. The broken soldier was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength sometimes meant knowing when to hold back, when to reveal yourself, and when to trust others with the truth of who you really are. The story was ending, but the legend was just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.